The great hall stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, and Ambassador Yelena Vasquez had never felt smaller in her entire life. She stood alone on a floating platform in the center of the massive chamber, surrounded by thousands of alien delegates who watched her with eyes that held no warmth, no welcome, and certainly no hope for what she had come to ask. 47 species filled the curved seats that rose like mountains around her, and each one represented a civilization older than humanity by thousands or even millions of years. The Vorathi sat at the highest tier, their ancient bodies made of living crystal that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows across the chamber walls. And their leader, High Arbiter Zelthon, looked down at her with the patience of a being who had watched stars be born and die. "You may speak, representative of Earth," Zelthon said, and his voice was like wind moving through a canyon, deep and hollow and impossibly old. Yelena took a breath and lifted her chin. She had practiced this speech for months, had memorized every word, had prepared for every possible question they might ask. But now that she stood here in this place where the fate of her entire species would be decided, she found that the words wanted to stick in her throat. "Honored members of the Covenant of Unified Worlds," she began, and her voice echoed through the vast space. "I come before you today as the voice of 8 billion souls who wish only to join your great alliance, to contribute what we can, to learn from your wisdom, and to stand beside you as partners in the grand journey of existence." She paused and looked around at the faces watching her. Some were curious, others were bored, and more than a few held expressions that she could only describe as hostile. 5 years ago, humanity reached beyond our home star for the first time," she continued. "And in that moment, we discovered that we were not alone in the universe. We discovered you, all of you, and we were filled with wonder and joy and hope for what we might achieve together." A murmur rippled through the assembly, and Yelena caught snippets of translated conversation that made her stomach tighten with worry. "The humans breed too quickly," someone whispered. "They fight among themselves constantly," another voice added. "They turn their own world into a wasteland and call it progress," a third delegate hissed. Yelena forced herself to continue, her hands clasped tightly behind her back to hide their trembling. "We know that we are young," she said, "and we know that we have made many mistakes in our history. We have fought wars among ourselves, we have damaged our world, and we have sometimes let our worst impulses guide us instead of our best ones. But we have also created art and music and literature that speaks to the deepest parts of what it means to be alive. We have loved and dreamed and reached for the stars even when everyone told us it was impossible. We have fallen down 1,000 times and gotten back up 1,001. She looked directly at Zelthon now, meeting his crystalline gaze without flinching. "We are not perfect," she said, "but we are trying, and we believe that with your guidance and friendship, we can become something greater than we have ever been before." The chamber fell silent, and for a long moment, no one spoke. Yelena could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears as she waited for the High Arbiter's response. Finally, Zelthon raised one of his many limbs, and the gesture brought absolute stillness to the assembly. "We have listened to your words, human," he said, "and we have studied your species for these past 5 years. We have watched your broadcasts and read your histories and observed your behavior, both the good and the bad." He paused, and something in his ancient eyes made Yelena's blood run cold. "The Covenant was founded 10,000 years ago to bring peace and order to a galaxy torn apart by war," Zelthon continued. "And in all that time, we have welcomed many species into our fold, but we have also turned others away when we judged them too dangerous, too unstable, or too unpredictable to be trusted with the power and knowledge that membership brings." Yelena felt the floor dropping away beneath her feet, even before he spoke the next words. "Humanity," Zelthon declared, and his voice rang through the chamber like a funeral bell, "is denied membership in the Covenant of Unified Worlds." A roar of approval erupted from at least half the delegates, while others remained silent, watching with expressions that ranged from pity to satisfaction. Yellen stood frozen on her platform, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything but stare at the ancient being who had just condemned her entire species to isolation. "Your kind is too volatile," Zelthun explained, as if he were discussing the weather rather than destroying everything Yellen had worked for. "Too aggressive, too unpredictable. You weaponize everything you touch, from simple tools to the very atoms that make up the universe. You fight and kill and destroy with a passion that terrifies even the most warlike species among us." He leaned forward slightly, and his crystalline body caught the light in a way that made him look almost sad. "We do not hate you, human," he said, "but we fear what you might become if given access to our technology and our secrets. We fear what you might do to us, to yourselves, and to the galaxy itself. And so we must refuse your request, not out of cruelty, but out of a duty to protect all the lives that depend on this covenant for their safety and survival." Yellen finally found her voice, though it came out barely louder than a whisper. "You are making a terrible mistake," she said. "Perhaps," Zelthun replied, "but it is ours to make. Guards, please escort the human representative back to her vessel." Two massive beings appeared at Yellen's sides, their armor gleaming and their weapons clearly visible, and she knew that there was nothing more she could do or say that would change what had happened here today. But as she was led away from the platform, away from the assembly, away from everything she had hoped to achieve, she stopped and turned back to face the thousands of delegates who had just rejected her people. "You will regret this," she said, and her voice was calm and steady and absolutely certain. "Not because we will seek revenge, but because one day you will need us, and on that day you will remember what you did here. You will remember that you looked at a species that wanted nothing more than friendship and partnership, and you turned them away because you were afraid of what they might become." She smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I hope you remember how to apologize," she said, "because when that day comes you will need to." And then she was gone, escorted through the great doors and out of the chamber and back to the small human ship, waiting to carry her home to a world that would receive this news with shock and anger and pain. The assembly buzzed with conversation after she left, most of it dismissive, most of it confident that they had made the right decision, most of it certain that the young and dangerous humans would accept their fate and stay quietly in their own small corner of the galaxy. Only one delegate watched the doors with an expression that was neither dismissive nor confident. She was a Kethari named Saruth, and her scales prickled with unease as she replayed the human ambassador's final words in her mind. She had studied humans more closely than most, and she knew something that the rest of the council did not seem to understand. Humans did not accept defeat gracefully. Humans did not stay quiet when they were angry, and humans absolutely did not forget when they had been wronged. Something was coming, she was certain of it, something that would change everything. She only hoped that the covenant would survive long enough to see it. 5 years passed after the day humanity was rejected, and in that time, the galaxy forgot about the small blue world circling an unremarkable yellow star on the outer edge of known space. The Covenant continued its business of governing and trading, and maintaining the peace that had lasted for millennia. And if anyone thought about the humans at all, it was only to feel relief that such a dangerous species had been contained before they could cause any real trouble. But on Earth, something was happening. Something that would have terrified the Covenant if they had known about it. Something that grew in secret underground facilities and hidden space stations and mines that burned with a quiet, patient fury. Director Amara Okonkwo stood in the heart of the largest of these facilities, buried 3 miles beneath the African desert, and she watched as the greatest project in human history took shape before her eyes. "How is the progress on the drive system?" she asked the young engineer standing beside her. "Ahead of schedule, Director," he replied with a grin that he could not quite hide. "We figured out the problem with the field harmonics last week, And now we are getting efficiency rates that are about 300% better than anything the Covenant has ever achieved. Amara nodded, but she did not smile. She had not smiled in 5 years, not since she had watched the broadcast of Ambassador Vasquez being escorted out of the Covenant Assembly Hall like a criminal, not since she had heard the High Arbiter call her species too dangerous and too unpredictable to be trusted. "What about the weapon systems?" she asked. "The kinetic accelerators are ready for installation," the engineer said, "and the adaptive shielding passed all its tests yesterday. As for the special project, well, that one is a bit more complicated." "Complicated how?" The engineer hesitated, then pulled up a holographic display that showed a complex web of neural pathways and quantum circuits intertwined in ways that should have been impossible. "We have confirmed that we can do it," he said slowly. "We can broadcast directly into the minds of any species we have encountered, including the Hollow." Amara turned to look at him sharply. "You have tested this?" "On captured Hollow organisms, yes. They did not enjoy the experience." For the first time in 5 years, Amara almost smiled. The Hollow had appeared 2 years after humanity's rejection, emerging from some unknown dimension beyond the edge of the galaxy. They were nightmares given flesh, biomechanical horrors that consumed everything they touched and left nothing but emptiness in their wake. They did not negotiate, they did not retreat, and they did not show mercy. The Covenant had thrown fleet after fleet against them, and fleet after fleet had been destroyed. Entire worlds had been evacuated or simply abandoned to their fate. The great and ancient civilizations that had looked down on humanity with such contempt were now running scared from an enemy they could not understand and could not defeat. And through it all, humanity had watched and waited and worked. "Show me the ship," Amara said. The engineer led her through a series of massive blast doors and security checkpoints until they emerged into a cavern so large that it had its own weather system. Clouds drifted near the ceiling miles above, and in the center of this impossible space floated the vessel that would carry humanity's answer to the galaxy. The arrival was beautiful in the way that a sword is beautiful, all sharp lines and deadly purpose wrapped in a shell of gleaming metal and glowing energy. She was over 2 miles long and bristled with weapons that would have made the Covenant's most powerful warships look like toys. Her engines could bend space in ways that their scientists said were impossible. And hidden in her heart was the system that would let her crew speak directly into the minds of their enemies. "She is ready?" Amara asked. "She will be ready within the month," the engineer confirmed. "And the support fleet is already assembled in the asteroid belt. 200 warships, Director, each one carrying crews that have trained for this moment for years." Amara placed her hand on a railing and looked up at the massive vessel that would change everything. "Do you know why I took this job?" she asked quietly. "No, Director." "Because I was there when Ambassador Vasquez gave her speech to the Covenant. I was one of her aides, standing in the back of the room, watching as those ancient beings decided that my daughter and my son, and everyone I have ever loved, was too dangerous to be allowed a voice in galactic affairs." She gripped the railing tightly. "They called us volatile and aggressive and unpredictable, and they were not wrong. We are all of those things. But they made a mistake when they assumed that those qualities made us a threat to be contained rather than an ally to be welcomed." She turned to face the engineer, and her eyes burned with something that might have been anger, or might have been pride, or might have been both. "We are going to show them exactly how volatile and aggressive and unpredictable we can be," she said. "And then we are going to save their lives, because that is what humans do. We fight and we struggle and we survive, and then we help others do the same, even when they do not deserve it." Far away, on a space station orbiting a world whose name humans could not pronounce, Sarith the Kethari sat in her office and stared at the data on her screen with growing alarm. She had spent the last 5 years monitoring humanity, watching their broadcasts and intercepting their communications, and trying to understand what they were planning. Most of her superiors had laughed at her concerns, insisting that the humans had accepted their fate and were no threat to anyone. But Sarith knew better. The humans had gone quiet, too quiet. Their public broadcasts showed a species that had turned inward, focused on rebuilding their own world and exploring their own small territory. But beneath that peaceful surface, Sarith had detected hints of something else, encrypted transmissions that her best code breakers could not crack, energy readings from facilities that officially did not exist, ship movements that made no sense unless someone was building a fleet in secret. And now the Hollow were coming for the Covenant's core worlds, for Valaris Prime itself, and the greatest military alliance in galactic history was failing to stop them. Sarith had tried to warn the High Arbiter. She had presented her evidence and made her case, and begged him to reconsider humanity's exclusion, while there was still time to ask for their help. Zelthon had dismissed her, with a wave of his crystalline limb. "The humans cannot help us," he had said. "They are primitives with barely functional spacecraft and no understanding of true warfare. Even if we wanted their assistance, they have nothing to offer." Sarith had not argued. She had simply bowed and left and returned to her station to continue her monitoring. And now, as she watched a new transmission flicker across her screen, she felt her scales ripple with a combination of fear and something that might have been excitement. The message was brief and encrypted, but she recognized the origin point. It had come from Earth, from a facility that her instruments said did not exist, and it had been broadcast on a frequency that should have been impossible to generate. She could not read the contents, but she did not need to. The very existence of the message told her everything she needed to know. The humans were ready. They were coming, and the galaxy would never be the same. The emergency session of the Covenant Council was not going well, and High Arbiter Zelthon could feel the fear spreading through the chamber like a disease. Delegates who had spent centuries maintaining calm and dignified composures were now shouting at each other, pointing fingers, demanding answers that no one could provide. "The Hollow have breached the Vorathi defensive line," a military commander reported, his voice trembling despite his efforts to control it. "Our home fleet has been reduced to less than 30% effectiveness, and reinforcements are still 6 days away." A wave of despair crashed over the assembly, and Zelthon felt it in his ancient bones. The Vorathi were the founders of the Covenant, the oldest and most powerful species in the Alliance, and if their defenses were failing, what hope did anyone else have? "What of the other member worlds?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Most have recalled their fleets to protect their own territories," the commander admitted. "They are afraid, High Arbiter. They see the Hollow consuming world after world, and they have decided that survival matters more than unity." The Covenant was falling apart. 10,000 years of peace and cooperation were crumbling in a matter of months, and Zelthon could do nothing to stop it. He had lived for so long and seen so much, but he had never felt as helpless as he did in this moment. "We must evacuate Valaris Prime," one delegate shouted. "Save who we can and regroup somewhere safer." "There is nowhere safer," another replied bitterly. "The Hollow do not stop. They do not rest. They will follow us wherever we go until there is nothing left." Sarith stood in her usual spot near the back of the chamber, watching the chaos unfold with a mixture of sadness and grim anticipation. She had seen this coming for months, had tried to warn anyone who would listen, but no one had wanted to hear what she had to say. And now it was too late. Or perhaps, she thought with a flicker of hope, perhaps it was exactly the right time. The first sign that something had changed was a subtle vibration in the floor, so faint that most of the delegates did not notice it, but Sarith felt it. And she knew immediately that it was not caused by anything natural. Then the alarms began to scream. "Unknown contacts," a sensor operator shouted from his station, multiple unknown contacts dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the planet. Zelthon turned to stare at him in disbelief. "That is impossible," he said. "Nothing can exit faster-than-light travel within a gravity well. The physics simply do not allow it." "I am reading what I am reading, High Arbiter," the operator replied, his voice climbing toward panic. "And I am showing 201 vessels in a formation I have never seen before. The largest is over 2 miles long, and they are all broadcasting on a frequency that is not in any of our databases." The main display screen at the front of the chamber flickered and changed, replacing the tactical readouts with an image that made the entire assembly fall silent. A human woman stood on what appeared to be the bridge of a warship, and she was smiling in a way that made Sarith think of predators who had finally cornered their prey. Behind her, dozens of human officers worked at stations covered in displays and controls that looked nothing like Covenant technology. "Greetings to the honorable members of the Covenant of Unified Worlds," the woman said, and her voice carried easily through the chamber. "My name is Director Amara Okonkwo of the United Earth Government, and I bring you a message from the people of Earth." Zelthon found his voice, though it came out weaker than he would have liked. "You have no right to be here," he said. "Humanity was denied membership in this covenant, and your presence in our space is a violation of—" "Oh, we know all about what we were denied," Director Okonkwo interrupted, and her smile grew wider. "We remember it very well. We remember being told that we were too dangerous and too unpredictable and too aggressive to be trusted. We remember being escorted out of your precious assembly hall like criminals. And we remember promising that one day you would regret that decision." She leaned forward slightly, and her eyes seemed to burn even through the display screen. "That day has arrived." Before Zelthon could respond, another voice cut through the chaos. It came from a different human, a man in a military uniform who appeared on a secondary screen. "This is Captain Marcus Cole of the Earth vessel Arrival," he announced, and his voice was calm and confident in a way that seemed almost impossible given the circumstances. "We are aware that you did not invite us here. Fortunately, we do not need an invitation." The tactical display updated to show the human fleet spreading out around Valaris Prime, taking up positions that the Covenant military officers immediately recognized as defensive formations. "What are you doing?" Zelthon demanded. "What does it look like we are doing?" Captain Cole replied. "We are protecting this planet from the Hollow Armada that is currently 12 hours away from turning everyone on it into food." A murmur rippled through the assembly, confusion mixed with something that might have been hope. "Our sensors show that your defensive fleets have been destroyed or scattered," Cole continued, "and your reinforcements are too far away to arrive in time. Without us, this world will fall and everyone in this chamber will die. With us, you have a chance." "Why would you help us?" a delegate shouted. "We rejected you, we humiliated you, we called you dangerous and turned you away. Why would you risk your lives for species that treated you so badly?" Captain Cole was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its military hardness. "Because that is who we are," he said simply. "You called us dangerous, and you were right. We are the most dangerous species this galaxy has ever seen. But being dangerous does not mean we cannot also be kind. It does not mean we cannot be brave or generous or willing to sacrifice for others." He looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was speaking to every being in the chamber personally. "You turned us away because you were afraid of what we might become," he said. "But you never stopped to think about what we might become if given a chance to prove ourselves. You never considered that the same fire that makes us dangerous might also make us the best friends you could ever have." Sareth felt her heart's pounding as she listened, and she realized that she was witnessing something that would be remembered for as long as the galaxy existed. "The Hollow are coming," Captain Cole said, "and when they arrive, they will find humanity waiting for them. You can stand with us or you can hide in your bunkers and hope we succeed. Either way, we are not leaving." He paused, and when he spoke again, there was a hint of a smile in his voice. "We were banned from the council," he said, "but no one ever said we could not crash the party." The transmission ended, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Some delegates were shouting in outrage, others were crying with relief, and still others simply sat in stunned silence as they tried to process what had just happened. But Sareth was not doing any of those things. She was watching the tactical display, watching the human fleet take up positions around the planet she had called home for decades, watching ships that should not exist prepare to fight an enemy that had never been defeated. And for the first time since the Hollow had appeared, she believed that the galaxy might actually survive. The humans had arrived, uninvited and unwelcome, and they were about to show everyone exactly why they should have been feared. Not as enemies, but as the allies that no one had been smart enough to accept. The Hollow arrived exactly when the human sensors said they would, and even after all the warnings and all the preparations, the sight of them still made Sareth want to scream and run and hide in the deepest hole she could find. There were thousands of them, biomechanical nightmares that looked like someone had taken the worst creatures from a fever dream and given them bodies of twisted metal and pulsing flesh. They moved through space without any apparent propulsion, as if the laws of physics simply did not apply to them, and they radiated a hunger that could be felt even across the vast distances of the void. The Covenant officers in the Defense Center watched their screens with expressions of absolute despair. They had seen the Hollow destroy entire fleets without slowing down. They had watched worlds burn and civilizations fall, and now that same unstoppable force was coming for them. But the humans did not look afraid. Captain Marcus Cole stood on the bridge of the arrival with his hands clasped behind his back and a small smile playing at the corner of his mouth. And if anyone had asked him, he would have admitted that he was actually looking forward to this fight. "All ships, this is the flagship," he announced over the fleet-wide channel. "Weapons free in 30 seconds. Remember your training and remember who you are. We are humanity, and today we are going to teach these things what fear feels like." A cheer erupted from every ship in the fleet, 200 vessels crewed by men and women who had spent years preparing for this exact moment, and when the timer reached 0, they attacked. The Covenant observers expected the humans to form defensive lines, to use standard tactical formations, to fight the way every civilized species in the galaxy had always fought. But the humans did none of those things. Instead, they scattered. The human fleet exploded outward in what looked like complete chaos, ships flying in every direction at speeds that should have torn them apart, firing weapons that seemed to have no pattern or purpose. The Hollow, confronted with this madness, hesitated for the first time in their existence. "What are they doing?" High Arbiter Zelthon demanded, watching the battle unfold on the main display. "This is suicide. They have abandoned all formation discipline." Sareth shook her head slowly, her eyes fixed on the screen. "No," she said quietly, "watch more closely." And as the battle continued, the pattern became clear. It was not chaos at all, but something far more sophisticated. The human ships were moving in constantly shifting formations, never staying in one place long enough to be targeted, always covering each other even as they appeared to be flying independently. They were like a school of fish avoiding a predator, except these fish had teeth and claws and were not interested in running away. The arrival itself waded into the center of the Hollow Armada, her massive guns blazing, her shields flaring as they absorbed hits that would have destroyed any Covenant vessel 10 times over. Captain Cole directed the battle like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction, his voice calm and steady even as explosions lit up the space around his ship. "Bravo Wing! Break left and hit that cluster near the gas giant," he ordered. "Charlie Wing, I need you to draw those big ones away from the civilian transports. Delta Wing, you are doing great, keep pushing." The Hollow were dying. They had never encountered anything like this before. Their usual tactics of overwhelming force and relentless advance were useless against an enemy that would not stand still long enough to be overwhelmed. Every time they tried to focus on a target, that target was already gone, replaced by three more that attacked from different angles. But the Hollow were not stupid, and they were not about to give up. They began to adapt, changing their formations, trying to predict the unpredictable patterns of the human fleet. Slowly, inevitably, they started to gain ground. "They are learning," Director Okonkwo said from her station aboard the Arrival. "It is time to show them our real weapon." Captain Cole nodded. "Do it," he said. Deep in the heart of the Arrival, a team of specialists activated a system that had never been used in combat before. It was based on technology that the Covenant did not know existed, technology that let humans broadcast thoughts and memories directly into the minds of other beings. And in that moment, every Hollow in the Armada received a message. It was not words. It was images, feelings, experiences. It was the collected memory of humanity's entire existence, compressed and concentrated and fired like a bullet into the alien consciousness of the enemy. The Hollow saw cave paintings and campfires, humans huddling together against the cold and dark of a world that wanted them dead. They saw plagues and famines and natural disasters, and they saw humans surviving them all. They saw wars fought with sticks and stones, then swords and spears, then guns and bombs and weapons that could crack the planet itself. They saw humans being beaten down again and again, and getting back up every single time. And most importantly, they saw that humans were not afraid of them. They saw soldiers charging into certain death because their friends were in danger. They saw mothers lifting cars to save their children. They saw explorers walking into the unknown with nothing but curiosity and stubbornness to guide them. They saw a species that had spent its entire existence fighting things that wanted to kill it, and winning through sheer refusal to accept defeat. The Hollow had fed on the fear of countless species across the galaxy. Fear was their power source, their weapon, their very reason for existing. But when they looked into the minds of humanity, they found no fear. They found something else instead. They found hunger. Humanity was hungry too. Hungry for knowledge, for experience, for challenge. And as the Hollow processed this realization, they understood something that shook them to their core. They were not the predators here. They were the prey. For the first time in their existence, the Hollow felt fear. And they ran. The retreat was not orderly. It was not strategic. It was pure, blind panic. Thousands of biomechanical horrors turned and fled from the human fleet, abandoning their attack on Velaris Prime, abandoning their plans of conquest, abandoning everything except the overwhelming need to get away from these terrifying creatures who smiled as they killed. Captain Cole watched them go, and his smile grew wider. "All ships stand down," he ordered. "Let them run. I want every Hollow in the galaxy to know what happened here today. I want them to spread the word about what humans do to things that threaten our friends." In the Covenant Assembly Hall, thousands of delegates sat in stunned silence as they watched the impossible unfold on their screens. The Hollow had never retreated from anything. They had consumed worlds and destroyed civilizations without hesitation. But now they were fleeing from a species that the Council had dismissed as too young and too primitive to matter. High Arbiter Zelthon felt the weight of 10,000 years pressing down on his crystalline shoulders. He had made many decisions in his long life, some good and some bad, but he was beginning to suspect that rejecting humanity had been the worst mistake he had ever made. Captain Cole's face appeared on the main display, still wearing that infuriating smile, and his eyes found Zelthon among the crowd of delegates. "High Arbiter," he said, "I believe we have something to discuss." Zelthon nodded slowly, his ancient body creaking with the movement. "Yes," he agreed, "I believe we do." And somewhere in the back of the chamber, Sarith the Kethari felt her scales ripple with an emotion she could finally identify. It was hope. 1 month after the Battle of Valaris Prime, the Great Assembly Hall looked exactly the same as it had on the day humanity was rejected. The same curved seats rising like mountains around the central platform, the same thousands of delegates watching from their positions, the same crystalline form of High Arbiter Zelthon presiding from the highest tier. But everything had changed. Ambassador Yelena Vasquez walked into the chamber with her head held high and her shoulders straight, and this time she was not alone. Captain Marcus Cole walked on her right side, his military uniform crisp and his posture perfect. Director Amara Okonkwo walked on her left, her eyes scanning the assembly with the calm assessment of someone who had learned to expect both the best and worst from the universe. The delegates watched them approach in absolute silence. There was no murmuring this time, no whispered insults, no expressions of contempt or dismissal. There was only a profound and uncomfortable respect for the species that had saved them all. Zelthon rose from his seat and spread his crystalline limbs in a gesture of welcome that he had not offered to any species in 6,000 years. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, and his voice echoed through the chamber with an emotion that sounded almost like regret. "We welcome you back to the Covenant Assembly. We owe you and your people a debt that can never be repaid." Yelena stopped at the edge of the central platform and looked up at the ancient being who had once told her that humanity was too dangerous to be trusted. "High Arbiter," she said, "we did not come here to collect debts." A ripple of confusion passed through the assembly. They had expected the humans to demand compensation, to insist on favorable trade agreements, to leverage their victory into power and influence. That was what any sensible species would do. "Then why have you come?" Zelthon asked. Yelena climbed onto the platform and turned to face the thousands of delegates who were watching her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "We came because you asked us to," she said, "and because we believe that what happened 1 month ago was not an ending but a beginning. The Hollow are still out there, weakened and afraid but not destroyed. And there are other threats in the galaxy, dangers that none of us can face alone. The question is not whether we will need to stand together again, but when." Zelthon nodded slowly. "You speak wisdom, Ambassador," he said, "and we have discussed this matter at length. The Covenant has decided unanimously to offer humanity a permanent seat on the High Council. It is a position that has not been granted to any species in 6,000 years, and it represents the highest honor we can bestow." The chamber erupted in applause and cheers, delegates from dozens of species expressing their approval of this decision. But Yelena did not smile, and she did not bow in gratitude. She simply shook her head. The cheering died away, replaced by confused silence. "We decline," Yelena said. The assembly stared at her in disbelief. Refusing a seat on the High Council was unthinkable. Species had fought wars for less. Civilizations had risen and fallen in pursuit of the power and prestige that came with such a position. "I do not understand," Zelthon said carefully. "You came here uninvited, you risked your lives to save us, and now you refuse the reward we offer. What is it that humanity wants, if not a place among the rulers of the galaxy?" Yelena looked at the High Arbiter, and her expression was calm but determined. "We do not want to rule," she said. "We never did. What we wanted, what we have always wanted, was simply to be treated as equals. Not as children to be guided, not as dangers to be contained, not as primitives to be dismissed, but as partners who have something valuable to contribute." She gestured at the assembly around her. "You built this covenant 10,000 years ago, and in all that time, you created a system where some species are considered wiser and older and better than others. You created a hierarchy where the young are expected to bow to the ancient, where new ideas are rejected because they come from races that have not existed long enough to earn the right to speak." Her voice grew stronger as she continued. "That system failed you when the Hollow came. Your elder races were too set in their ways to adapt. Your rigid doctrines could not respond to an enemy that did not follow the rules. And if we had not arrived when we did, this entire civilization would have fallen because it was too proud to ask for help from a species it considered inferior. The chamber was absolutely silent now, and Yellen knew that she was walking a dangerous line. She was criticizing the very foundation of the Covenant's existence. She was challenging beliefs that had been held sacred for millennia. But she also knew that this was the moment that mattered, the moment that would determine whether humanity had truly changed anything, or whether they had simply won a battle only to lose the larger war. "We do not want a seat on your High Council," she said, "because we do not want there to be a High Council at all. We want a new covenant, one built on true equality, where every species has an equal voice regardless of how old they are or how long they have been members. We want a galaxy where a young race's ideas are not dismissed simply because they are young, and where an ancient race's wisdom is respected but not treated as law." She paused and looked around at the thousands of faces watching her. "We want partnership," she said simply. "Real partnership, the kind where everyone gives and everyone receives and no one is made to feel lesser than anyone else." A long silence followed her words, and Yellen could see the delegates processing what she had said. Some looked thoughtful, others looked skeptical, and more than a few looked angry at having their entire worldview challenged so directly. Then a voice rang out from the back of the chamber, clear and strong and absolutely certain. "I support humanity's proposal." Everyone turned to look, and Sarith the Kethari stepped forward from her place among the observers. Her scales shimmered with nervousness, but her voice did not waver. "I have studied humans for years," she said, "and I have come to believe that they understand something that we have forgotten. They understand that strength does not come from hierarchy or tradition or age. It comes from the willingness to stand together, to trust each other, to believe that every voice matters." She looked at Zelthon, and there was no fear in her eyes. "The covenant that rejected humanity was a covenant that was failing," she said, "and if we rebuild it exactly as it was, we will fail again. But if we listen to what the humans are offering, if we have the courage to change, then maybe we can build something better." Other delegates began to speak, some in support of humanity's proposal and some against it, but Yellen could see that the tide was turning. The fear of the Hollow was still fresh in everyone's mind, and the memory of humanity's impossible victory was even fresher. Finally, Zelthon raised his limb for silence, and the chamber fell quiet. "I have lived for a very long time," he said slowly, "and I have seen many things that I thought were impossible, but I never thought I would see the day when a species we rejected would return to save us, and then refuse the power they had earned in order to offer us something better." He looked at Yellen with something that might have been admiration. "Perhaps we banned you because we feared what you would become," he said, "and perhaps we were right to fear, but we were wrong to exclude, and we would be wrong again if we rejected this chance to learn from you." He bowed his ancient head, a gesture of respect that he had not shown to anyone in thousands of years. "The Covenant accepts humanity's proposal," he said. "Let us build something new together." The chamber erupted in a sound that was not quite cheering, and not quite crying, but something in between. The sound of a galaxy realizing that everything was about to change. And as the arrival departed Valaris Prime later that day, flying alongside ships from a dozen species that had once called humanity too dangerous to trust, Captain Cole stood on his bridge and watched the stars stretch into lines around him. "Do you think it will work?" Director Okonkwo asked, standing beside him. Cole smiled. "I think the galaxy spent centuries building walls to keep us out," he said, "and I think they never considered that humans are very good at tearing walls down." He turned and walked toward his ready room, leaving the bridge crew to guide the ship home. Behind them, the new covenant was beginning to take shape, and somewhere out in the darkness, the Hollow were still running. They would never stop running. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy would never be the same.